Alrighty then. Now we have the perfect mate. This is one of those episodes where, if you look at the world building parts of the episode and separate those from the story of the episode, you'll find a lot of ideas you can use in the world in general, and not specifically um, this story, because quite frankly this story is something very, very specific to a specific thing that happened in TNG, and not something that you would expect to happen on a regular basis, because empathic metamorphs are actually said to be extremely rare, and um, there's a whole bunch of things we don't know about what makes someone an empathic metamorph, and that makes it a little bit worse in terms of actually having the ability to try using that as a plot point. Now, the whole thing with the Kriosians and the Vultes is actually very similar to the split between the Romulans and the Vulcans. Except that in the case of the Kriosians and the Vultes, it was basically just at one point in time, their planet was functionally ruled by a single king. And then that empire had a power struggle where the two descendants of the one ruler now had a different opinion about who should lead the kingdom, and blah blah blah. Eventually you end up with two completely different spacefaring civilizations who are functionally the same species, yet live on different planets, and so on and so forth. The empathic metamorph is apparently something that can happen on both of them, because again, the Kriosians and the Vultes are the same species. Anyways, let's look at the other. This is one of the Kriosian leaders. Not much we really know about the guy. He was the person who was overseeing the transfer of custody of Kamala to her new home. The whole ceremony of reconciliation thing, that's another plot point, is that this was a one-off event. This isn't something that they did on a regular basis. This was their way of ending a long-standing feud between their two civilizations. Because, as we find out in a different episode, the Kriosians, and presumably also the Vultes, are subjects of the Klingon Empire. Yeah. That's also a plot point that gets brought up in Star Trek Enterprise. Yeah, because like a century or so before Picard talks to any Kriosians, they had the crew of the Enterprise back then also meet some Kriosians and talk about how their planet was annexed by the Klingon Empire a long time ago, and that they're kind of stuck with that. And as of TNG, as far as I know, that status is still in place. Where it goes afterwards, don't know. It's one of those things that kind of got dropped after TNG. I don't think they've been referenced at all, unless Star Trek Lower Decks went there. They may have gone there. Let's see here. Let's look at the Kriosian article. We have Kamala. Oh wait, no, this is Kaitama. Sorry, Kaitama was the one that they had in Enterprise. She was being transported from one place to another. Now, Kaitama was actually just royalty. on Krios. She wasn't an empathic metamorph. She was their princess or something. It says future first monarch, which I guess first monarch would be the person who is the queen of Krios or equivalent there. Now, due to the fact that they have a system of royalty, the whole first monarch thing might mean that it's more akin to emperor than king, where you have a bunch of kings who are subservient to an emperor, and she would be the person who would be filling the emperor role. And yeah, Ferengi attempted to sabotage the treaty for their own profit, which didn't work out for the Ferengi. It did, however, interrupt the proceedings, although things did actually um, end up going interestingly. See, it's like one of the things is that you'd be quick to skip over is that Alaric's uh, part of the reason why they have an interesting, not a love triangle with Kamala is that Alaric actually didn't really care. That's the funny thing, is that Alaric receiving Kamala, he's like, okay, fine, if you guys really want to, I'll accept your generous gift. He really, really cares more about the actual provisions of the treaty and sees it as a attempt to distract him from reading the treaty. Smart guy. Yeah, really though. Um, One of the things that's interesting from a aesthetic standpoint is that in some ways, the makeup used for the spots on Kriosians is very similar to that got used in DS9 and later works for the Trill. In TNG, Trill actually just had weird forehead ridges. They didn't actually have spots. Yeah, but in when they were doing the makeup for Terry Farrell, who was playing one of the main cast for DS9, they decided that just painting spots on her skin would work better as something that's, like a daily makeup application, and also just looked better than their attempts at giving her the forehead ridges that the Trill had in TNG. There is actually a picture you can find somewhere of her doing a screen test of how the makeup would look, and yeah, I honestly didn't like the Trill makeup that they did originally, so At any rate, though, there are some serious differences, however, because as you can see here, the pattern of spots, while it starts at her hairline and goes down the side of her face and neck, it only goes down to the middle of her back and also goes down her back, not her side. See, that's a very significant thing with Trill, is that in Trill, the spots go down the side of the torso. So, again, while there are some similarities in terms of having spots in weird places instead of having, different skin texture or colors, it's a similar idea, but not actually the same idea. Oh, and yeah, like I was saying earlier, is that Alric is not a young man. He's like, oh, you're giving me a hot young woman to be my wife. Yeah, whatever. I'm too old to actually care about that. Oh boy. But as a part of the ceremony of reconciliation, it was a gesture that was accepted as part of the ceremony, and so on and so forth. And oh, yeah, that's part of the negotiations. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, Alric cared more about the negotiations. And that is something that, honestly, I would depending on when you're setting your story involving the Kriosians and or Voltes, setting it after the ceremony of reconciliation would mean that you don't have those tensions. You would have them, working together and cooperating like good neighbors or something, instead of fighting each other over. Yeah, like I said, that's like the logic behind why they were fighting was basically a power struggle that eventually expanded into an interstellar war. Not a particularly excited war either. They were just fighting. It's more like border conflicts and squabbles than all-out war too, which meant that the status quo lasted for centuries. And the Klingons get to sit back and watch. Yeah, like I said, it's like all we really know about the Voltes is they're basically the same race as the Kriosians, except they live on Vault Minor instead of Krios. What do we know about Vault Minor? People have talked about it. That's about that. Oh, here's one. The history blurb that they gave out. The planet was the site of the Temple of Akadar, the historic seat of power for the empire ruled by Volt and Krios, the two brothers who are the progenitors of the Voltes and Kriosian races, before their love for Gareth caused a rift that would persist until the marriage of Alaric of Volt and Kamla of Krios. Seriously, we don't know a whole lot. This, however, is a very Romulus and Remus kind of history thing, which is probably what they were borrowing from. And while this particular phase of their history is pretty nebulous, that does kind of sort of give you a lot of freedom in using the races, because the fact that it's not exactly nailed down. There's a whole lot of fun you could have with them as a Klingon subject race too, because the Klingons don't exactly have the same Federation level of stuff. Is that like, if you're a subject race of the Klingons, as long as you do what the Klingons tell you, they're going to leave you alone. It's one of those like pay your taxes and have a nice day kind of things. Uh, yeah, Klingons get weird when you look at them from certain angles, because the fact that the Klingon culture treats other Klingons differently than non-Klingons. So Klingons literally backstabbing each other for little reason than they think it's fun doesn't get applied to other cultures and races. And the specifics of how it works out in practice are, from an outside perspective, largely arbitrary. But in cases like this, the Federation is acting as a mediator in a conflict between two races that are subjects of the Klingon Empire. Why? Because the Klingons have no interest in acting as mediators. And also, the Kriosians and the Voltes probably wouldn't want them to act as mediators anyways. So they decided that they wanted to have the Federation act as mediators in this diplomatic negotiation. Now, how will this change their status in the Klingon Empire? Probably almost nothing. I wouldn't imagine it to have any real long-term effect. It's like, oh, you guys have decided to stop fighting. Oh, that's boring. We were enjoying watching it. That's probably about all that I would expect the Klingons to have to say about it. It's like, as long as you keep paying your taxes, we're cool. Anyway, though, but yeah, this little bit of history here, yeah, ancient history for races other than major races is actually something you don't get in Star Trek very often. This is something you can't find for most other um, Star Trek minor civilizations, and that's actually part of the reason why I like the Kriosians as a race concept, is because of the fact that we actually have a genuine history for them. We see them in more than one episode. Their past gets talked about, which makes them a lot more than just a random alien of the week. And that is part of the reason why I like this episode. The actual marriage story and all of the stuff with Kamala as an empathic metamorph. I honestly saw that as baggage that weighed the story down. I think it would have been more interesting if they left out the empathic metamorph stuff, especially because of the pseudo um, love triangle thing, because the fact that the empathic metamorph thing means that she's going to psychologically become attached to Picard because he's the first person she sees when she falls out of the cocoon. Really? Really? Seriously? You're going with that? Hated it. Anyway, though, I should get back to that. Okay, so yeah, Temple of Akadar. All we know is what I said earlier about how it used to be the seat of power of the Empire. Blah 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 blah. Um, how exactly they made such a faithful recreation of it, we don't know. It is possible that one of the Voltese or Kriosian ambassadors had detailed enough scans of it to be able to just import the data into a holodeck program. I mean, as something, it's stated to have been an extremely important site for their cultures, both of them. So having it be something that people keep copies of does make a lot of sense. And yeah, back to the empathic metamorph thing. Kriosians, some of them at least, have empathic abilities that allow them to sense what other people feel. Not necessarily like mind reading, but it's like, oh, you're angry, and you have like an empathic ability to sense that whole thing. And in the case of empathic metamorphs, this allows them to mold their own behavior so that their behavior is something that the other person that they're um, bonded with likes. Which, yeah, the whole bonding process is the part about this. It's kind of weird. It's like, how does the bonding process work? Because in the episode, it was basically said that the reason they shoved Kamala into the cocoon was to delay her bonding process because it was almost time for her to bond to someone. And the idea was that when she got out of the cocoon, it would be Ulrich that she bonded with, and quite frankly, I don't think Ulrich would have cared, but whatever. Oh, yeah, also is that supposedly Gareth was an empathic metamorph. Ye that kind of makes you kind of like ask a whole lot of questions, though, is because both Volt and Krios loved Gareth. Which of the two of them was Gareth bonded to? Or is it that the whole bonding thing is actually more flexible than we were led to believe, and that a empathic metamorph can actually just bond to someone new and, whatever. Um, yeah. Oh, also, it's mentioned that most empathic metamorphs were male for some reason. The genetic quirks required for it, at least in the Kriosian population, are more common in. If you look at this as a matter of genetic dominance, and it's a sex-linked genetic trait, and empathic metamorphs require 2 copies of a recessive gene, thus the males are more likely to have a expressed copy because the males would only have one gene or the other, not 2 genes, and thus blah 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 blah. This seems like something that would be relatively easy to establish, and also something that would be so widespread in the population that, the majority of them would act like that. Also, since it's a genetic trait, you have entire families that have that, presumably. And now we're rabbit holing. Yeah, I know. The explanation for the genetic trait is something where I just kind of like question, like, why isn't this like the entire population now? Because it seems like something that's like generally better. Okay, the people who wrote this seem to have written it so that like they are forgetting that random genetic mutations are inheritable. If you, via a random genetic mutation, have the color of your hair be different than that of your parents, your children will inherit the color of your hair, not the color of hair that your parents had. Yeah, I know. Hollywood writers getting things wrong like that is relatively common, but yeah. Honestly, I saw this plot point as being something that was kind of a nothing burger. It was a reason to have Kamala do stuff, and Kamala interacting with various members of the Enterprise crew ended up chewing up a whole bunch of screen time in what would otherwise be a relatively short story. Now, the part with the Ferengi. That was actually kind of interesting because the Ferengi are getting involved in a territorial dispute in Klingon territory. And what the Klingons would do to the Ferengi if the Klingons found out that the Ferengi tried to sabotage the negotiations is completely unknowable. Because the fact we don't actually know how much the Klingons supported the idea of reconciliation. So it's entirely possible that one of the Klingon officials is actually who tipped off the Ferengi about this. If a Klingon governor who was overseeing the situation with the Kriosians and the Voltis decided he wanted to sabotage the reconciliation thing, he might have tipped off the Ferengi and told the Ferengi that they something that like you could make a profit if you play your cards right in these negotiations or something like that. Ultimately, the reasons were never given. The reason for why Qual and the other guy did this are unknown, other than the Ferengi were trying to make a profit off of sabotaging the negotiations. Hey, if you want to use this in a story, feel free to make up your own explanation for this. Oh, also, it's like being transported to Starbase 117, where they were expected to face charges. I'm genuinely curious what laws they're going to charge them under, because Krios and Vault aren't Federation territory. Now, there is things where lying to Federation officers, sabotaging something on board a Federation ship. There are some laws like that would apply to this because of the fact that the negotiations were happening on board the Enterprise, and thus their attempts at sabotaging the negotiations in a physical way did in fact happen on board the Enterprise. And that's as far as I can go with it, though. Expected to face charges. Yeah. All of the serious charges in this, they can't charge them for under Federation law. Anyway, moving on. Another interesting thing on this, because this is an episode that does world building in ways that you don't see in Star Trek often. Gold was used in this episode as part of the Ferengi's attempt at sabotaging the negotiations. Parlinor attempted to buy Kamala from Ambassador Briam for gold. Now, while Briam refuses the offer, because quite frankly, given the situation, the amount of gold offered was seemingly rather laughably small, it wasn't the item that was being offered that was the problem. It was the fact that I believe the phrase "not for sale" applies here. If not for the fact that things had already been arranged and deals made, it's hard to say exactly how the offer would have gone down. Briam doesn't actually give much of a explanation of just how much he thinks the 20,000 Ludugial gold coins are actually worth. He just says Kamala's not for sale. The logic here is seemingly that there are places in the galaxy that do actually use gold as a trade commodity. I mean, these are, as far as I know, from the Bars and Wormhole episode. Like, the Ferengi are like, yes, we will match any other offer someone gives you, and also throw it in a bag of gold. The way I understand it, these are like 1 inch or something like that. They're really not large. They're like square coins, almost. Anyway, though. Alright, so what else is there? That's about it, honestly. It's like, the Kriosians are one of the more interesting minor races in Star Trek, because of the fact they've been used in multiple episodes and thus actually have a genuine history you can look at and play with, rather than having like 5 lines of text for their backstory and a few lines of text explaining their current status of the race. I mean, like, in the episode about the one of the episodes I was talking about, I went to talk about the Bosliks, and that the same thing is true with the Bosliks, is that none of the episodes with the Bosliks actually dives deep into the Bosliks. But you have them show up in multiple episodes, and that creates a wealth of information that's actually usable and not just a one-note, one-off race. And then you have the Akamarians, who are seen in one episode and one episode alone, but the episode is such a deep dive on Akamarian civilization and culture that you get a good feeling for who they are in only one episode. Very strange. I mean, I believe in the episode about the Akamarians, I said that in the Akamarian episode, you get as much information about the Akamarians as a civilization as you got in all of the original series for the Klingons. Because, again, like I said, the Akamarians were the true star of the show and not just a participant. The A plot and the B plot were both Akamarian related, and things of Akamarians doing things, and so on and so forth. And in this episode, you have the Kriosians doing stuff all over the place. Granted, a very large chunk of that is Kamala, which is kind of a nothing burger in terms of world building, because it all fits into the whole empathic metamorph thing, which, if you're not going to use that in a TTRPG, well, whatever. Also, like, the whole empathic metamorph thing is like, one thing that doesn't get explained here is like, what is a male empathic metamorph like? Are any of the other Kriosians we've seen also empathic metamorphs? That is actually a very real possibility. Like, what was that guy's name? Briam. Is Briam an empathic metamorph? Because, like, it's mentioned that Kamala was actually trained while she was growing up how to use her empathic metamorph abilities better. Who trained her and how? Again, it's one of those things we kind of don't know, but a male empathic metamorph as part of the training process is a possibility, at least. And also is that Briam, as an empath, would actually have better, shall we say, skill at doing diplomatic negotiations. They never actually say whether he is or isn't an empath. And the logic behind empathic metamorphs suggests that there is actually a significant percentage of the Kriosian population who are empaths. Obviously not all of them, but that is a major thing to consider when writing Kriosians, is that you can just be like, oh yeah, this guy's an empath. And just throw that out there. And have the character have the ability to, do stuff. Oh, also is that, I forgot the pheromones thing. Much like with Orions, empathic metamorphs sometimes will emit pheromones that have a effect on people around them. Not a particularly strong effect, apparently, but a little something. Anyways, I think that's about it. Very interesting episode in terms of the world building stuff. I wouldn't try adapting the story from this one. All right, see you guys later.